They present it as a work of art, a fanciful medieval map from 1357. That is the first layer of the cover narrative. These are not illustrations, they are schematics. Blueprints for a global atmospheric energy grid that predates our industrial age by centuries. A system that maps an ice-free Antarctica and Siberian megaliths with impossible precision. Have you ever felt it? That low, persistent hum of cognitive dissonance? A deep sense that the story we were sold is missing its most crucial chapters. If you feel that static in the official timeline, leave your trace. Tell us from where and from what time you are receiving this transmission. Now, we move from the document to the physical world. We become forensic witnesses to a crime scene that spans the entire globe and stretches back through a manufactured history. What you are about to see will create a permanent state of cognitive dissonance, a schism between the world you were told existed and the one your own eyes can verify. The first piece of evidence is the paradox of scale. Look closely at this page from the 1357 manuscript. It depicts what the official narrative calls a fantastical city. But this is no fantasy. It is a schematic. Observe the impossibly slender spires, not of stone, but of a metallic, conductive material, each terminating in an etheric accumulator, a sphere, a spire, an antenna. The narrative they sold us is one of stylistic influence, of neoclassical revival. A trivial matter of fashion, this is a deliberate misdirection. Fashion does not explain the identical engineering principles. Fashion does not explain the function encoded in the form. This was not imitation. It was installation. The vertigo intensifies. We leap across another ocean, to the other side of the planet, Melbourne, Australia. A former penal colony, a remote outpost at the very edge of the known world. And there, we find the Royal Exhibition Building and the Parliament House. Again, the same architectural DNA. The same grand domes, the same towering spires, the same impossible scale, erupting from a landscape supposedly being carved out of the wilderness by pioneers with hand tools. Russia, America, Australia. 3 continents, 3 supposedly unique cultures, 3 fledgling powers, all simultaneously building identical pieces of a high-technology network for which they possessed no scientific framework, no industrial base, and no logistical capacity. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. We are told these were the achievements of our grimy, horse-drawn ancestors, yet they are perfect replicas of a technical manual dated half a millennium earlier. It was a single system, a global civilization with a standardized infrastructure, wiped so cleanly from the records that we now stare at its remnants and call them miracles of a primitive age. See how they are interconnected by faint lines, not roads, but a diagram of a power grid, a wireless energy network humming with a force we have been taught to forget. Hold that image in your mind's eye. Now let us overlay it with this. A photograph from the late 1800s. Chicago, Buffalo, St. Petersburg. The city is irrelevant. The architecture is the signal. The same impossible spires pierce a sky thick with coal smoke. The same ornate domes, designed not for worship but for resonance, dominate the skyline. The technology is identical, a perfect match to the 500-year-old blueprint. But now, look down. Look to the foundation of these titans. Look at the people. Their faces are grim, smeared with the grime of a primitive existence. They stand on muddy, unpaved streets. They navigate between these technological marvels in crude wooden carts, pulled by tired animals. Look at their posture. It is not the pride of a builder. It is the vacant, bovine admiration of an inheritor, a survivor wandering through a museum whose exhibits are still, inexplicably, running. They are not the creators of this world. They are its orphans. Your own eyes are the final arbiter. Do you see proud Victorians celebrating their industrial might? Or do you see bewildered scavengers, camping in the ruins of a fallen golden age? This was the empire the manuscript belonged to, an empire whose name we are forbidden to speak, an empire that did not use maps to discover the world, but to manage it. This is the point where the investigation turns from the physical to the biological, from the hardware of the old world to the software of the new. If you erase a global infrastructure, you must also erase the population that knew how to operate it. One of the manuscript's final, most disturbing pages confirms this protocol. It is not a map. It is a census, It lists populations for cities across the globe in 1357, numbers that dwarf the official historical record. It speaks of sprawling metropolises, where our history books paint a picture of quaint villages. This is a snapshot of the world before the fall, the world before the Great Silence. But it is the section that follows that freezes the blood. It is titled, Imprecise, Technical Script, Protocols for Populational Recalibration. It is a contingency plan. The drawings in this section are not of castles or cathedrals. They are schematics of a different kind of structure. Multi-storied, austere buildings with countless identical rooms, long corridors and enclosed courtyards. They are instantly, terrifyingly familiar. They are the mirror images of the great orphanages, the foundling hospitals, and the monolithic insane asylums that erupted across the entire Western world in the 19th century, immediately after the construction of the energy grid ceased. If your senses detect this same profound dissonance, this glaring impossibility, confirm it. A simple like on this transmission ensures this visual evidence bypasses the algorithms of suppression and reaches other minds who are ready to see. The anomaly is not just in the sky, it is beneath our very feet. Let us return to the manuscript. Here, a detailed floor plan of what we are told is a, quote, cathedral. It shows the architect's original intent. A grand, triumphal archway on the ground level, a portal designed for a grander humanity, leading into vast, resonant chambers. It clearly marks multiple levels below this entrance, sub-basements, conduits, machinery rooms. Now, here is that same cathedral today. Find a photograph. Go there, if you can. Feel the cold stone. Trace the lines of the masonry, stained by centuries of pollution. But where is the grand entrance? Where is that monumental door? It's gone. Or rather, it has been swallowed. That towering archway is now a squat, miserable basement window, its peak barely clearing the modern pavement. The doors you use to enter today are pathetic afterthoughts, punched through the walls of what was once the second or even third story. The street level is a lie. The city you walk upon is built on the tomb of another, far greater city. The connection is a circuit that, once closed, can never be opened again. The manuscript does not just document the old world, it contains the operational plan for the new one. The reset was not merely a cataclysm, it was a managed demolition. And what followed was not a natural recovery, it was a controlled repopulation. These institutions, presented to us as monuments of Victorian charity, were in fact processing centers. They were indoctrination hubs for the new, memory-wiped human software. Where did the millions of orphans who filled these asylums and were shipped across continents on orphan trains truly come from? They were the blank slates, the survivors of the old world, or a newly cultivated stock, raised without parents, without history, without any connection to the civilization that lay buried just a few meters beneath their feet. They were programmed with a new, fabricated history, a new religion, and a new sense of limitation. They were taught to look at the technological marvels around them not as their inheritance, but as the work of gods, or mysterious founding fathers. They were the first generation of the control matrix. The purpose of this global operation was not just to seize control of the planet's energy grid, it was to seize control of the human mind itself. This isn't erosion. This is not the slow settling of time. This is evidence of a sudden, catastrophic burial, a liquidity event, a mud flood, a deluge of soil that raised the very ground we stand on by meters, hiding the true scale and majesty of this inherited technology. The manuscript was the blueprint. The 19th century photograph is the aftermath, and the world outside your window is the ongoing cover-up. We have been taught to call these structures churches and parliament buildings. The manuscript gives us their true names: power stations, frequency generators, atmospheric harmonizers. The evidence has been in plain sight all along. They just had to engineer our minds not to believe our own eyes. Let us for a moment consider the official story. Let us hold it up to the light. The academic narrative surrounding the 1357 manuscript is presented to us as a closed case, a settled matter. But when you examine it, you find it is not a fortress of fact, but a house of cards, trembling in the slightest breeze of critical thought. This is the central pillar of their timeline, and we are about to demonstrate just how fragile it truly is. The story they tell us is a masterclass in cognitive dissonance, a tale so full of convenient miracles and statistical impossibilities that it insults the very intelligence it seeks to placate. To create a permanent state of cosmic orphandom where we would forever feel small, disconnected, and grateful for the scraps of technology doled out to us by our invisible masters. They didn't just bury cities. They buried our identity. They buried our potential. The evidence is not hidden in a secret vault. It is right in front of us, disguised as our own history, our own culture, our own cities. These structures are everywhere. Have you ever seen buildings with this same displaced architecture in your own town? That old post office, the county courthouse, the imposing bank downtown. Look at them again. They are not just buildings, they are artifacts. They are the tombstones of a forgotten world and the pillars of our invisible prison. Tell us where you see them. The pattern must be made visible. And so, a new humanity was born, not from the primordial dust, but into a world already built. A world of silent, colossal structures that scraped a sky they no longer understood. Imagine them. Our ancestors, not as pioneers forging a new world, but as scavengers picking through the ruins of a forgotten one. They were the inheritors of a kingdom without a key, tenants in a palace whose architects had vanished. They walked on paved streets their simple carts could never have laid, their muddy boots echoing in vast, empty halls built for giants of intellect. They begin by assuring us of the document's age. The parchment, they say, is authentically 14th century. The chemical composition of the ink, the style of the vellum binding, all point with scientific certainty to the year 1357. They build this foundation of physical fact, only to immediately demolish it with their explanation of the contents. Because when confronted with the schematics for atmospheric energy plants, the hyper-accurate maps of lands yet undiscovered, and the complex engineering principles detailed within, they resort to the last refuge of a failed argument: magic. They call it imaginative anachronism. They ask us to believe that a medieval monk in a cold stone cell, with no tools beyond a quill and a candle, simply imagined it all. Think about what they are asking you to accept. They want you to believe that this nameless, faceless man, living in an era of superstition and plague, somehow hallucinated the precise coastal topography of an ice-free Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be discovered for another 400 years. That he dreamt, with the precision of a civil engineer, the architectural plans for a global network of structures that would only begin to appear in the 19th century. He didn't just draw fantasy castles. He drew functional diagrams complete with resonant frequency patterns in the margins that perfectly match modern cymatic experiments. This was not a renaissance. It was an occupation by orphans. They were a cargo cult on a planetary scale. They found a world filled with the machinery of gods, and, with the profound and tragic misunderstanding of children, they began to mimic the ghosts. They saw the intricate conductive filigree on the facades of buildings, nodes in a planetary energy grid, and saw only a place to hang their crude, new symbols of power: a family crest, a national flag, an insignificant banner of a temporary kingdom, nailed onto the terminal of a technology that powered a global empire. The irony is so crushing, it becomes a form of cosmic poetry. They stood on the shoulders of giants, not to see further, but to proclaim their own smallness. Look at the spires of their newfound churches, our cathedrals. They saw towering antennae, fractal collectors of atmospheric energy, and called them fingers pointing to God. They repurposed the most advanced acoustic technology ever conceived, chambers designed for harmonic resonance, for cellular healing through precise frequencies, and filled them with ritual. The science of sound therapy, a technology for the body, became the liturgy of the soul. The Gregorian chant is not a song of worship. It is the degraded echo of a diagnostic and healing procedure. This isn't imagination. This is a technical manual. To call it fantasy is to suggest that a man in the Stone Age could have imagined the complete source code for a modern operating system. It is not an explanation. It is an evasion. It is a miracle that conveniently papers over a gaping wound in their historical timeline. They are forcing a square peg of advanced technology into the round hole of a primitive past, and they are telling you the grotesque splintering of logic is just art. Do you truly believe that? Or do you, like us, sense the profound dishonesty in the script? The second crack in their fragile narrative is the identity of the creator himself, or rather the lack of one. The manuscript is attributed to author anonymous. This is presented not as a clue, but as an unfortunate dead end, a historical curiosity. But in a forensic investigation, the absence of evidence is, itself, evidence. The most profound works of human genius are almost never anonymous. We know who painted the Sistine Chapel. We know who wrote the Divine Comedy. We know who designed St. Peter's Basilica. The impulse of the singular genius is to claim his creation. So why would the author of a work that dwarfs all of these, a complete atlas and technical guide to a lost global civilization, neglect to sign his name? It is the ghost of a machine, a beautiful, haunting ritual performed by a people who have forgotten the function but desperately cling to the form. They felt the power in the stones, the resonance in the air, but lacking the operational manual, they could only invent a story to explain the feeling. They replaced engineering with theology. Everywhere, the story is the same. This is the great mimesis of the survivor, the systematic repurposing of function into decoration. Balconies that were once docking ports for personal airships became ceremonial platforms for kings they had just invented. The vast, resonant domes, designed as etheric accumulators, became the ceilings of parliaments and banks, places where they would trade paper tokens of a wealth that was a pale shadow of the energetic abundance that once was. They lived inside a dead machine and called it civilization. They polished the chrome, swept the floors, and lit candles in the engine room, praying for a light the machine was already built to give them. They were not building a new world. They were squatting in the old one, redecorating it with their own ignorance. This process of functional decay was not an accident. It was a managed demolition of consciousness. The architects of the reset, the parasites, understood human nature. The answer is devastatingly simple. The manuscript was never meant to have a signature. You are not looking at a work of art from a lone visionary. You are looking at a government document, a piece of state-issued infrastructure intelligence. Does the modern blueprint for a city's electrical grid have a single artist's signature in the corner? Does a military manual detailing the operation of a complex weapon system bear the name of a poet? No. They bear serial numbers, department codes, and classification stamps. The anonymity of the 1357 manuscript is not a mystery. It is its defining feature. It is the proof that it was not the product of a single mind, but of a systemic, standardized, and technologically advanced body of knowledge. It was created by a department, an administration, a bureau, within a global empire they call Tartaria. The official narrative's desperate search for a lone, mad genius is a cover story, a misdirection designed to keep you from asking the real question. What kind of civilization possessed the institutional knowledge to produce such a document as a matter of routine? The lack of a founder is the proof of a forgotten system. The silence where a name should be is the deafening roar of a lost empire. So the official story rests on two pillars of sand. They knew that a population stripped of its knowledge would not leave the technology to rust. They would adopt it. They would humanize it. They would wrap it in myth and ritual, neutralizing its power by turning it into a symbol. It was the most brilliant act of psychological warfare ever conceived, to allow the conquered to keep the palaces, but to convince them they were churches. To let them keep the tools, but to teach them they were objects of worship. The matrix of control was not built with new bricks. It was built by changing the labels on the old ones. The most effective prison is the one the inmates maintain themselves, believing it to be a sanctuary. We are the children of this cargo cult. We walk the same streets, we gaze up at the same silent structures, and we feel the same dissonant echo in our bones. We are told these are monuments to the faith and ingenuity of our recent ancestors, the men in top hats and horse-drawn carriages. But a part of us knows this is a lie. The scale is wrong, the technology is wrong, the timeline is impossible. We are a civilization with a phantom limb. We can feel the memory of a power and a history that we have been told we never had. The first is the miracle monk, a 14th century prophet who dreamt of the 19th century with the accuracy of a surveyor's laser. The second is the ghost in the machine, the anonymous genius who created the single most important document in human history and then vanished without a trace. They present us with these two fictions, these children's fables, and they call it academic consensus. They demand we accept a statistical impossibility on one hand and a psychological paradox on the other. This is the fragility of their narrative. It cannot withstand the simple application of logic. It is a story designed not to explain, but to conceal. It is an intellectual anesthetic, meant to dull our senses and prevent us from seeing the ruins of a vastly superior world that lies scattered all around us, hiding in plain sight. They offer us a fairy tale because the truth is too big, too revolutionary, and too threatening to their control over the present. We now exit the court of academic opinion and enter the cold, sterile engine room of reality. This is the domain of physics, of economics, of logistics. It is a place where narratives and theories are weighed and measured not by their elegance, but by the unyielding laws of mass and energy. We are haunted by the ghosts of our own forgotten greatness. The melancholy we feel when standing before a great cathedral is not awe at its construction. It is the soul's grief for a lost memory, a forgotten capability. It is the amnesia of a fallen god, staring at a tool he no longer remembers how to use. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, of a species living in the shadow of its own forgotten legacy, resonates with you, if it validates a feeling you couldn't quite name, then ensure you are subscribed. We need awakened minds for the work ahead, because the next step is not to simply mourn what was lost, but to begin the forensic work of remembering who we truly are. The order we inherited was built on a lie, and the proof is not in what is written, but in how the writing ends. In the final pages of the manuscript, the steady hand of the engineer, the calm archivist of a global network, begins to tremble. The ink bleeds. The precise, geometric lines devolve into a frantic, desperate scrawl. The document ceases to be a manual. It becomes the last testament of a world being murdered. Words not seen before now claw their way across the parchment. Inversion of the celestial current, the silence of the ether, the mud that rises. This is not a prophecy. The official story, fragile as it was, now faces its final, mechanical audit. It will not survive the calculations. The first exhibit in this audit is not an artifact, but an equation. A chemical formula detailed with the precision of a modern laboratory manual, hidden within a section of the manuscript labeled, "On the Tempering of Stone." It describes a binding agent, a mortar. The ingredients are specific: metallic dust, finely pulverized quartz crystals, and other additives mixed in exact ratios. Modern analysis reveals that this is not medieval mortar. When subjected to a specific acoustic frequency, this mixture doesn't simply dry. It undergoes a chemical transformation, solidifying into a substance with the compressive strength and durability of high-grade geopolymer concrete. The official narrative, our control matrix of history, states that Portland cement, the very foundation of our modern world, was invented in 1824. The manuscript provides a superior recipe 467 years earlier. This is not an anomaly. This is a mathematical verdict. The probability of a 14th century monk, isolated and without a tradition of chemical engineering, stumbling upon this precise formula is not low. It is zero. But a formula on a page is not a building. Let us move from the abstract to the brutally physical. Consider the construction of a single one of the cathedrals detailed in the manuscript. It is a real-time log of the kill switch being thrown. This was the Great Reset, not an economic theory, but a physical event, a cataclysm by design. The silence of the ether was not a poetic metaphor. It was the shutdown of the global energy grid. A sudden, deafening quiet in the symphony of the world as the lifeblood of their civilization was cut off. And then came the mud. Not a flood of water, but of earth. A weaponized liquefaction of the very ground beneath their feet. A liquid tide of soil and oblivion rising from below to swallow cities whole, to bury a golden age under a blanket of amnesiac dirt. This was not an accident of nature. It was an act of war, a controlled demolition of an entire epoch, executed with a precision as terrifying as the technology it erased. And from the ruins, the parasites emerged. The survivors who either orchestrated the event or were prepared for it. Their first act was not to rebuild. It was to begin the engineering of oblivion. The most brutal phase of the reset was not the physical destruction, but the meticulous, systematic burning of the archives of the human mind. They understood a fundamental truth. You cannot control a people who remember what they are capable of. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of tons of stone, bound by this resonant concrete. Now let us do the math they refused to do. How many tons of quartz crystals are needed? Where were the industrial-scale quarries for this specific mineral in the 14th century? How were they pulverized into a fine, consistent powder without industrial grinding machinery? Imagine the sheer man-hours required using primitive tools to produce just 1 ton of this material. The numbers spiral into the billions of hours. It would take a workforce the size of a nation, decades, to produce the raw materials for a single structure. And the manuscript shows a global network of them. They tell us these structures were built with faith, hammers, and chisels. We tell you the math proves this is a lie. The energy expenditure, the resource processing, the sheer tonnage. It describes an industrial capacity that makes the 19th century Industrial Revolution look like a village blacksmith's workshop. The evidence is not in what we see. The evidence is in the deafening silence of the supply chain, the negative evidence. There are no records of these mines, no ruins of these processing plants, no accounting for the labor. It is a ghost industry, a phantom infrastructure. The product is there, standing before our very eyes, but the process, the logistical reality of its creation, has been surgically removed from history. So they initiated the Great Reclassification. They found the surviving blueprints, the technical manuals like our manuscript, and they did not burn them. That would be too crude, too obvious. Instead, they neutralized them. They relabeled them. A schematic of a resonant power station became a, quote, fantastical drawing of a castle. A circuit diagram for a healing chamber became religious iconography. Engineering became art. Science became myth. Truth became fantasy. The grand architecture that survived the mud was too vast to hide, so they gave it a new history. They built a cover story of primitive men with hammers and chisels, raising impossible structures in decades. They populated these inherited, empty cities with a new breed of human, us. Orphans, disconnected from our own past, taught to look upon the works of our true ancestors with bovine wonder. The final act of this forensic wipe took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. The so-called World's Fairs were the last liquidation sales of the old world's technology, a final public display before it was all crated up, hidden away, or destroyed in the fires of manufactured world wars. Every revolution, every war, was a targeted demolition, erasing the last physical echoes of the civilization that came before. They engineered this quiet. If the impossibility of the building material strains credulity, the logistics of the power system shatters it completely. The manuscript is an atlas of a planetary energy grid. It maps with unnerving accuracy the locations of key resources. It details veins of quicksilver, mercury in the Americas, and deposits of the iridescent metal, bismuth in Asia. It marks these not as curiosities, but as essential components for the ether accumulators and resonant cores housed within the domes and spires of the global architecture. Let us, for a moment, entertain this. Let us calculate the cost of this system in 1357. Mercury is a dense, hazardous liquid. Bismuth is a brittle metal that requires sophisticated refining. The manuscript implies a constant global flow of these materials. We are not talking about a few vials for an alchemist. We are talking about metric tons. Thousands of tons moved across oceans. Now, visualize the official version of the world in 1357. A world of wooden ships at the mercy of winds and currents. A world where a journey across the Atlantic was a multi-month, life-threatening ordeal, if it was considered possible at all. Into this world, we must now inject a global industrial shipping network. A fleet of vessels capable of transporting thousands of tons of hazardous materials between continents. They weaponized our ignorance. But the silence is only as powerful as our complicity. Silence is their most potent weapon. Sharing this information is our only defense. Send this to someone who needs to awaken. Because they did not just bury our cities. They buried the memory of who we are, and it is our duty to dig. And so, the final, chilling truth settles upon us. The history we were taught is not a record of our ascent, but the cover narrative for our fall. We are not the pinnacle of a grand evolutionary journey from the cave to the skyscraper. We are the inhabitants of a global orphanage, a species with engineered amnesia, living in the beautifully crafted, silent ruins of a civilization so far beyond our own that we lack the very language to describe it. This is the ultimate cognitive dissonance, to be told we are free while living inside a prison whose walls are the edges of our own manufactured ignorance. Our glorious story of progress is a ghost story, told by the victors to the children of the vanquished. We are the heirs of a forgotten kingdom, wandering through the halls of our ancestral home, touching walls we cannot comprehend, staring up at dormant technologies we mistake for art. Who built these ships? Where were the shipyards? Who financed these fleets? Who trained the navigators to follow routes to continents that were supposedly unknown? Who managed the logistics of feeding and paying thousands of sailors and dock workers? Who built the refineries on the coast of Peru to process bismuth ore and the secure storage facilities in Europe to house the mercury? The official history provides no answers because the question itself is forbidden. To ask it is to expose the entire narrative as a physical, economic, and logistical impossibility. The logistical paradox is absolute. You cannot have a global technology network without a global transport network. You cannot have a global transport network without a global industrial base. And you cannot have a global industrial base in the 14th century without rewriting history itself. The manuscript is not the fantasy. The fantasy is the timeline we have been forced to inherit. The numbers do not lie. The tonnage is real. The distances are real. The energy required is real. The only variable, the only part of the equation that is fabricated, is the historical context they have provided. Mathematics is a cold, impartial judge. It does not care for our degrees, our institutions, or our comfortable beliefs. It presents a paradox that cannot be resolved within the current model. The architects of this matrix of control did not need to chain our bodies. They only needed to sever the link to our memory. They left the infrastructure standing as a silent testament to their power, a daily, subconscious reminder of a greatness we can see but are forbidden to understand. This is the final stage of the engineering of forgetting. To make us believe this diminished state, this life of toil and limitation, is our natural condition. It is not. It is our captivity. But within this tragic realization, a dangerous hope ignites. The manuscript of 1357 and artifacts like it are more than relics. They are keys. They are proof that our current state is an anomaly, an artificial suppression of a far greater human potential. This is a legacy not of progress, but of profound and catastrophic loss. A history not of invention, but of rediscovery. A potential not to be achieved, but to be reclaimed. Deciphering these remnants is not an academic exercise. It is an act of spiritual and intellectual rebellion. It is the sacred duty of the amnesiac to seek his own name. The true secret is not about etheric energy or resonant architecture. It is about who we were, and therefore who we can be again. It is about recovering a dignity that was stolen from our entire species. If you believe you can reconcile these figures, if you can build this global network with 14th century technology and a balanced budget of man-hours and resources, we invite you to present your calculations. Explain the math, because we have run the numbers, and the only possible conclusion is that the civilization that wrote this manual was not ours. We are merely living in its shadow, blind to the scale of what we lost. The logistical audit proves an impossibility. The industrial audit confirms a fabrication. But it is only when we zoom out, when we allow the cold lens of cartography to reveal the sheer scale of the operation, that the true nature of the crime comes into focus. The evidence presented in the manuscript ceases to be about a single, anomalous structure or a forgotten formula for concrete. It becomes a global schematic, a franchise blueprint for a worldwide empire. The section of the manuscript that details standardized architectural symbols is not a glossary of artistic motifs. It is a technical legend, a key to a planetary machine. Here, the symbol for an atmospheric transmission station is a clean, monolithic obelisk. The symbol for an aether accumulator is a vast dome, always crowned with a metallic cupola. These were not suggestions. They were specifications. The question the manuscript forces upon us is not simply what happened to them. The question is, what are we going to do now that we know we are them? The silence is breaking. The evidence is an echo, growing louder. But this excavation is not a spectator sport. It is a summons. The investigation does not end with this transmission. If you feel the resonance of this truth in your bones, if you are ready to stop being an orphan of history and start reclaiming your inheritance, then our work has just begun. The investigation does not stop here. If you want to continue unearthing the truth with us, subscribe and activate the bell. Welcome to the Resistance. The building blocks of a unified planetary energy grid. Now, hold that image from a 14th century parchment, and let us begin our journey. We are no longer in the archive. We are in the air, suspended above the world, watching a pattern emerge from the chaos of history, a signal rising from the noise. First, to the heart of the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg. We descend upon St. Isaac's Cathedral. Look at its dome, a colossal accumulator designed to draw power from the heavens, exactly as depicted in the Manuscript schematic. It was supposedly built in the mid-19th century, a time of serfdom and relative industrial infancy. Yet here it stands, a titan of engineering that would challenge even modern builders. It corresponds perfectly to the Manuscript symbol for a primary energy node. Now, we cross the Atlantic in an instant. A geographic leap that should represent a total cultural and technological disconnect. We arrive in Washington, D.C., capital of a young republic that had just decades prior been a collection of disparate colonies. And what do we find at its heart? The Capitol building. Look again. The same dome. The same portico. The same fundamental design. A sister structure. An identical piece of functional hardware, erected in the same narrow window of time, an ocean away.